Back to Chattanooga, Rosecrans' army was in motion. The Federals were advancing, but as yet they were afar off. Chattanooga must be fortified. Well, do we remember the hard licks and picks that we spent on these same forts to be occupied afterward by Grant and his whole army, and we on Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge looking at them? Am visited by my father. About this time, my father paid me a visit. Rations were mighty scarce. I was mighty glad to see him, but ashamed to let him know how poorly off for something to eat we were. We were living on parched corn. I thought of a happy plan to get him a good dinner, so I asked him to let us go up to the colonel's tent. Says I, "Colonel Field, I desire to introduce you to my father, and as rations are a little short in my mess, I thought you might have a little better, and could give him a good dinner." "Yes," says Colonel Field, "I am glad to make the acquaintance of your father, and will be glad to divide my rations with him. Also, I would like you to stay and take dinner with me," which I assure you, O kind reader, I gladly accepted. About this time, a young African, Wit, came in with a frying pan of parched corn and dumped it on an old oilcloth and said, "Master, dinner is ready." That was all he had. He was living like ourselves, on parched corn. We continued to fortify and build breastworks at Chattanooga. It was the same drudge, day by day. Occasionally a Sunday would come, but when it did come, there came inspection of arms, knapsacks, and cartridge boxes. Every soldier had to have his gun rubbed up as bright as a new silver dollar. W.A. Hughes had the brightest gun in the Army and always called it Florence Fleming. The private soldier had to have on clean clothes, and if he had lost any cartridges, he was charged 25 cents each and had to stand extra duty for every cartridge lost. We always dreaded Sunday. The roll was called more frequently on this than any other day. Sometimes we would have preaching. I remember one text that I thought the bottom had been knocked out long before, and Peter's wife's mother lay sick of fever. That text always did make a deep impression on me. I always thought of a young divine who preached it when first entering the ministry, and in about 20 years came back, and, happening to preach from the same text again, an old fellow in the congregation said, "Mr. Preacher, ain't that old woman dead yet?" Well, that was the text that was preached to us soldiers one Sunday at Chattanooga. I could not help thinking all the time, "Ain't that old woman dead yet?" But he announced that he would preach again at 3 o'clock. We went to hear him preach at 3 o'clock, as his sermon was so interesting about Peter's wife's mother lay sick of a fever. We thought maybe it was a sort of sickly subject, and he would liven us up a little in the afternoon service. Well, he took his text, drawled out through his nose like small sweetness long drawn out, "Martha, thou art wearied and troubled about many things, but Mary hath chosen that good part that shall never be taken from her." Well, you see, O gentle and fair reader, that I remember the text these long gone 20 years. I do not remember what he preached about, but I remember thinking that he was a great ladies' man, at any rate, and whenever I see a man who loves and respects the ladies, I think him a good man. The next sermon was on the same sort of a text, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and took out of... He stopped here and said E meant out of, that E, being translated from the Latin and Greek, meant out of, and took E, or rather out of a rib, and formed woman. I never did know why he expatiated so largely on E. Don't understand it yet, but you see, reader mine, that I remember but the little things that happened in that stormy epoch. I remember the E part of the sermon more distinctly than all of his profound eruditions of theology, dogmas, creeds, and evidence of Christianity, and I only write at this time from memory of things that happened 20 years ago, out a-larking. At this place we took Walter Hood out a-larking. The way to go a-larking is this. Get an empty meal bag and about a dozen men and go to some dark forest or open field on some cold, dark, frosty, or rainy night, about 5 miles from camp. Get someone who does not understand the game to hold the bag in as stooping and cramped a position as is possible, to keep perfectly still and quiet, and when he has got in the right fix, the others go off to drive in the larks. As soon as they get out of sight, they break in a run and go back to camp and go to sleep, leaving the poor fellow all the time holding the bag. Well, Walter was as good and as clever a fellow as you ever saw, was popular with everybody, and as brave and noble a fellow as ever tore a cartridge, or drew a ramrod, or pulled a trigger, but was the kind of boy that was easily roped into fun or fight or anything that would come up. We all loved him. Poor fellow, he is up yonder, died on the field of glory and honor. He gave his life. 'Twas all he had for his country. Peace to his memory. That night we went a-larking, and Walter held the bag. I did not see him till next morning. While I was gulping down my coffee, as well as laughter, Walter came around, looking sort of sheepish and shy-like, and I was trying to look as solemn as a judge. Finally he came up to the fire and kept on eyeing me out of one corner of his eye, and I was afraid to look at him for fear of breaking out in a laugh. When I could hold in no longer, I laughed out and said, "Well, Walter, what luck last night?" He was very much disgusted and said, "Humph, you all think that you are smart. I can't see anything to laugh at in such foolishness as that." He said, "Here, I have brought your bag back." That conquered me. After that kind of magnanimous act, in forgiving me and bringing my bag back so pleasantly and kindly, I was his friend, and would have fought for him. I felt sorry that we had taken him out a-larking, hanging 2 spies. I can now recall to memory but one circumstance that made a deep impression on my mind at the time. I heard that 2 spies were going to be hung on a certain day, and I went to the hanging. The scaffold was erected, 2 coffins were placed on the platform, the ropes were dangling from the crossbeam above. I had seen men shot and whipped and shaved and branded at Corinth and Tupelo, and one poor fellow named Wright shot at Shelbyville. They had all been horrid scenes to me, but they were rebels, and like baguettes like. I did not know when it would be my time to be placed in the same position, you see, and a fellow feeling makes us wondrous kind. I did not know what was in store in the future for me. There was the rub, don't you see? This shooting business wasn't a pleasant thing to think about, but Yankees, that was different. I wanted to see a Yankee spy hung. I wouldn't mind that. I would like to see him agonize. A spy? Oh yes, they had hung one of our regiment at Pulaski, Sam Davis. Yes, I would see the hanging. After a while, I saw a guard approach, and saw 2 little boys in their midst, but did not see the Yankees that I had been looking for. The 2 little boys were rushed upon the platform. I saw that they were handcuffed. Are they spies? I was appalled. I was horrified. Nay, more, I was sick at heart. One was about 14, and the other about 16 years old, I should judge. The ropes were promptly adjusted around their necks by the provost marshal. The youngest one began to beg and cry and plead most piteously. It was horrid. The older one kicked him and told him to stand up and show the rebels how a Union man could die for his country. Be a man. The charge and specifications were then read. The props were knocked out, and the two boys were dangling in the air. I turned off, sick at heart,